As I introduce this presentation, Dreams Within Dreams, Nabonidus, king of Babylon, and Daniel, I want to emphasize a couple of key points. Some of those are listed in the slide, but I also want to remind you or share with you, if you haven't heard this before, that the book of Daniel is a unique book. We believe that Daniel was a prophet. He was an exile, a Jewish exile, or more properly, a Judahite exile from Jerusalem, taken to Babylon as a young person with friends, and he became a wise man ultimately in the Babylonian court. And he made some incredible prophecies. They're so astounding and so accurate that later historians and scholars said this is impossible. There's no way that a guy living in the 6th century can predict the history of the world all the way down to the end of time when the Messiah is said to come back. It's impossible. The first person to question this was a guy that lived not too far from me where I work in Sicily. We have an excavation at the earliest Christian church possibly ever built in Sicily after the time of Constantine the Great. We're at a town called Salemi, the town of peace. The church is called San Michele, and just 30 minutes to the west on the coast is the modern town of Marsala, but in antiquity it was called Lilybaum. And Lilybaum was where a particular person named Porphyry lived. He was a Greek philosopher of the old school. He lived in the 3rd century, and as he started seeing the growth of the Christian church in Lilybaum and spreading across Sicily, we believe it started with Paul, perhaps over in Siracusa on the other side of the island of Sicily. Porphyry became alarmed. His name Porphyry refers to the purple stone. It's also associated with the name of the Phoenicians. Some people believe he migrated across the Mediterranean and ended up in Sicily to take care of a nervous breakdown. And they said the climate of Sicily will soothe you and you'll feel a lot better. And he ironically moved in with a Christian family. And he became alarmed when his friend who he was staying with died and his wife was left with children. And the Christian elders were coming by encouraging her to sign a will over to turn the property over to the church. And he thought, those dirty Christians trying to steal this woman's property, at least that's how he viewed it. And so he went on a real thing to show that the arguments of the Christians were not valid. And one of their big arguments he discovered was the book of Daniel, that Daniel had predicted the future from the time of the ancient Babylonians, which Porphyry was aware of all the way till the end of time. And these prophecies were profound and very detailed. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, 9, Daniel 11 and 12. All of these pointing to a history of the world yet to come. And Porphyry was alarmed by that, so he started doing his own study and focused on Daniel 11 and said there's no way that a guy living in the 6th century, this so-called Daniel, could have predicted the whole history of the world. He has to be a fake. And he was one of the first ones to say that Daniel was written in the 2nd century when the Greeks and the Romans were already on the scene, not way back in the Babylonian times, and that this is really a prophecy written after the things that already happened. So it's not a prophecy at all. Okay, it's a fake. And this alarmed the Christians so much because this had been an anchor stone for their preaching, the prophecy of the Bible or the prophecies of Daniel. And so his book, Porphyry's book, most of it was destroyed by the Christians. They didn't like it. And so all the copies were eliminated. But the Christians who responded to them, over a dozen major Christian scholars of that time, church fathers, they wrote responses to his criticisms, trying to answer all of his critiques. And because they wrote about him so much, they were so concerned about him, we can reconstruct almost the entire book of Porphyry from the criticisms made against it. So we know that he did not like Daniel. And even in the 19th century, scholarly critics who do not believe in the inspiration of the Bible argued that Daniel has to be written after the fact in the time of a Greek king named Antiochus Epiphanes. I'm sure some of you have heard that, maybe most of you. And so the book is not truly a prophetic book. That, of course, has a direct attack on our Adventist theology because we hold Daniel in high esteem. We believe Daniel was a historic person. He really did write these prophecies ahead of time in the 6th century. And the sanctuary doctrine itself emanates from the book of Daniel, particularly in Daniel 8. Then will the sanctuary be restored or cleansed? We sometimes say it has all of those meanings in the Hebrew word. Recently, I've noticed, reading on the internet, that even among Adventists, there are Adventists that are suffering Daniel fatigue, and they're tired of fighting the critics. They're not really sure Daniel knew what he was talking about, and that probably Porphyry and the critics of the 19th century are correct, and we're wasting our time on the sanctuary doctrine. And I saw a publication just, I think, within the last week or so, basically making that point. Our own research, it's not just me working on this, we're working with a number of scholars. We believe the opposite. The more we dig into the research, and not all of our research has been published yet, we do believe that Daniel was written before the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Even though we're going against the grain on that, we're finding evidence to show it's an authentic 6th century book. And we also believe that the sanctuary doctrine that emanates from Daniel and other parts of Scripture is still valid. In fact, maybe it's more valid, more important than ever before. And that's kind of the main thrust I want to make with this presentation. Now, I'll apologize for the presentation in that it is a bit long. I was putting this thing together, and I probably have a few too many details. It's a complicated story, but you'll kind of get an insight into how scholars navigate through some of this stuff, perhaps. So let me go ahead and move through these. I'll try and go as quickly as possible, because I've been told when people start getting up and leaving, it's not necessarily because they don't like what I'm saying, but there's a potluck next door, and people's stomachs can only take so much pain before they have to satisfy that with some nourishment. I probably want to be there too, so we'll see if we can keep moving this along. Here's the basic point of this presentation. In 556 BC, before the time of Christ, that would be the 6th century, Nabonidus had a special dream. He was living in Babylon at this time. He was a high official. And this dream he had was unique in that it was two dreams in one. Scholars call it a dream within a dream, in which a dream he was having was interrupted by a second dream that gave Nabonidus critical information. The first dream concerned a disruption in heaven. The stars were not in the proper alignment, particularly Jupiter, the moon, and the sun, the great star. Jupiter and the moon represented two deities of Babylon, the god Sin for the moon, and Marduk, the god represented by Jupiter. And the fact that their relationship in the heavens was in the wrong configuration alarmed Nabonidus. This was a bad omen for him, and we'll explain in a moment why. So the second dream involved the appearance of two supernatural beings who explained this disjunction in the heavens between these godlike planets. The two beings come and explain everything to Nabonidus, and one of their key messages was, you need to restore the sanctuary of the moon god Sin. Restore the sanctuary. Now, those words, as I was reading through this in my research, struck me because it's basically the same identical thing said in the book of Daniel, that Daniel, when he's asking about the sanctuary being restored, he's thinking about Jerusalem, of course. He is given a vision, and two people appear in that vision as well, and they say it's going to be 2,300 days, or evenings and mornings technically, we call them days, years sometimes, before the sanctuary is restored, but it will be restored, okay? So here you have an interesting thing where Nabonidus is concerned about a sanctuary being restored, and Daniel comes along and he's concerned about a sanctuary being restored. It's not the same sanctuary though, and it's not the same God. And the other interesting thing I'll share with you, I'm giving you my conclusion at the beginning, and then we'll move through the story, is that Daniel's vision, I didn't realize this till I was doing my research, came only 3.5 years after Nabonidus had his vision. Nabonidus had a special vision, a dream within a dream. Two people appear, it's two parts of a dream, two people appear and they explain everything, and one of the main points is that a sanctuary must be restored. Daniel was probably witness to that, and I'll explain why later. It was written down in a big monument and stuck in front of the Ishtar Gate of Babylon, and Daniel probably walked by it every day on his way to his various duties from his house in the royal sector. And so he was very well aware of this dream within a dream, and it turns out it was one of the most compelling dreams that a Babylonian had ever had, because it established a new god sin, not a new god really, but has the chief deity over even Marduk, and it affirmed Nabonidus' kingship, and it basically predicted that Babylon would continue on in spite of the dream Nebuchadnezzar had earlier that Daniel had interpreted, saying that Babylon would come to an end, and it would be replaced by the Medo-Persian Empire, then by Greece, and then later on, they didn't know the name at the time necessarily, but by Rome, and then the Messiah would return. So Daniel was aware of these implications, and he was wondering, what is God going to do? What is God going to say? Will he say anything at all as he witnessed this? So this is the background to what this dream within a dream is, and we'll give a little bit more information on that. As I said, 3.5 years later in 553, Daniel also had a special dream, and it was a dream within a dream. Another point I want to make about this is that there's only 2 dreams within a dream in the history of antiquity. Nabonidus, and most scholars say it's the only one they know about, but there happens to be one in Daniel 8 as well. Adventist scholars caught on to the double dream, particularly Dr. William Shea. He said, well, there's 2 different words going on here, 2 different dreams happening at the same time. One is called a hazon with an H. Okay, that's the general word for vision. But then that vision of the ram and the he-goat fighting in the heavens, disrupting the heavenly sanctuary and the stars falling out of the heavens, kind of reminding us of Nabonidus' dream. But in addition to that, we've got this explanation. Bill Shea recognized that the second dream, where the 2 beings are talking to each other, has a different word in the Hebrew. It's called mare. So the mare is a special vision. The second vision, a dream within the dream that interrupts the first vision. And the second vision interprets the first vision. The 2 angels are talking, and they explain what the first vision means. And ultimately they say, when will all this chaos in the heavens and the desolation of the sanctuary and all these terrible things, when will it stop? When will the sanctuary be restored? That was the point of the first vision Daniel was having. The answer is given by the second angel. It's believed to be Gabriel, and he says, after 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored. By the way, Nabonidus, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, he had a timeline of his own. Nobody knows about that. It was about 50-some years from the destruction of his sanctuary to his mandate to restore it. For Jerusalem, according to the prophet Jeremiah, and Daniel knew this, it was to be 70 years between the destruction by the Babylonians of Jerusalem, by Nebuchadnezzar, until the restoration. And this is mentioned in the prophecy that the Jerusalem sanctuary would be restored. So Daniel was looking forward to this. When he gets this second vision, though, he's stunned, because when the explanation comes about when will that restoration happen, he is told after 2,300 evenings and mornings. And he understood that wasn't just, that would just be a few years, much less than the 50 or the 70 years of the other prophecies. But he understands it to mean years, and that blows him away. It's not 2,300 days, it's 2,300 years. That puts it way into the future. And Daniel is sick because he realizes he will not live to see the restoration of Jerusalem, because the sanctuary is not going to be restored for a long, long, long time. What's going on? Daniel had to wonder that. What does the sanctuary mean? Now I'm going to make a couple of comments about the sanctuary. Now I'm going to have to race through these pictures. It's terrible. But anyway, the sanctuary in the ancient Near East was an extremely important institution in virtually every religion. Every people around the Israelites had their own sanctuary for their own god or gods. What was the purpose of a sanctuary? The sanctuary is where you met God. Now, just like today, or like for the Jews in antiquity, you don't just walk into the presence of God as sinners. We understand that if a sinner walked into the presence of God, he'd be struck dead, because the holiness would just burn up the sinfulness of the creature. Even in ancient Near Eastern theologies, they had a similar problem. A common person could not go into the presence of God. Instead, there were special people trained and appointed to do that for you. A sanctuary would be built in the Middle East, particularly in Iraq, Mesopotamia, Iran, those kinds of places, particularly Iraq. The sanctuary would be shaped in a series of steps. We call them ziggurats. And at the top of the ziggurat, Sometimes the ziggurat would have 3 steps, 4 steps, 7 steps, but at the top of it would be a special shrine. And the priest at appointed times would go up the stairs of the ziggurat, enter into the shrine where he could enter into the presence of God and mediate for his people. Okay, so it was the access point that all citizens or all people living in a particular kingdom would have to God through the sanctuary and the priest mediating in that sanctuary. You were not, as a common person, allowed to go in there. You had to wait for the priest to do it. There were different services at different appointed times in each of these different religions, but you still had to follow the protocol. In a sense, Jerusalem was not too different. Who went into the most holy place? Certainly not the average person. They were restricted to outside the outer court. Regular priests could go into the first court and into the holy place. The high priest only could go into the most holy place, and that at a designated time. What was the purpose of these ceremonies in the Jewish cult anyway, or the Israelite cult? It was to facilitate the communion of God with his people. God said, let them build me a sanctuary so I can dwell among them. But in their sinful condition, they could not directly go into that sanctuary. But the point of a sanctuary is to have a way for sinful humans, or humans in general, to commune with God. Now I'm jumping kind of ahead a little bit. What was the point of the heavenly sanctuary? Ultimately, we're told that we're going to be able to enter into the heavenly sanctuary ourselves. We're not going to need, initially we need Jesus Christ. But when we have accepted Jesus as our Savior, that's the sacrifice. The sacrifice of Jesus gives us the right to enter into the presence of God and live with him for eternity. This is a major point. And by the way, the other major point I make in my little presentation is that we as Christians, like all Christians, emphasize the centrality of the cross. And that's right. And it's proper. There's absolutely no doubt that the cross is critical, because without the sacrifice, and other sanctuaries had sacrifices too, by the way, but without the sacrifice, there was no access to the sanctuary. And without access to the sanctuary, there was no access to God. When Jesus Christ died, he gave us all the right to enter into the presence of God in his sanctuary. That's amazing when you think about it. If you take away the sanctuary doctrine, like more and more people are wanting to do, you're basically saying, Jesus died, I'll live forever. But there's no connection to living in the presence of God. You're on your own. Yeah, Jesus did this wonderful thing, but, live forever, but there's no enjoyment. There's no living with the presence of God. What's the advantage of living in the presence of God? He protects you. He educates you. He takes care of all of your needs. He helps you understand love. He makes you a loving being. He improves your relationships with everybody in the universe. There's a whole bunch of things that God does when we're able to directly access him through his sanctuary. And that's his ultimate goal, is to bring us into his sanctuary. And the sanctuary, while there is a physical, I believe, a real place, once you're in a relationship with God, that sanctuary follows you wherever you go in the universe. Because once you're saved, once you're in communion with God, you are always in the presence of God. He's omnipresent, he's omniscient, and wherever you go, you'll have that. But that's only for the saved people. But to be saved, it's necessary to enter into the presence of God. Without the sanctuary, there's no communion with God. There's no relationship with God. I hope I'm making a point, not overkilling it, but I think this is absolutely critical. So for those Adventists who say we don't need the sanctuary, they're basically, to me, if you understand the Bible and ancient Near Eastern thinking, you're saying, I can live forever, but I don't need God. And that, to me, is a contradiction. It's absolutely crazy. The whole goal of the Christian experience is to be able to have a personal relationship, we say with Jesus Christ, but with God throughout eternity, to have a good, loving, merciful, secure, protected life wherever we go forever. This is a wonderful blessing that God is promising us. And this is what the sanctuary doctrine is all about. Now I've got to move through quickly. I don't even know in Village anymore when the service is supposed to end, but I know you start a little later here, so I'll kind of go on. When you get a little tired, let me know it's time to go eat. There was a discovery made in 1895. Now we're going to move into a little bit of archaeology. This is a map of ancient Babylon made in the 19th century. And if you look at the bottom of this map, you'll see a town called Hela, and there's a red circle going around it. Can you see that at the bottom of the map there? And just above that map, you see the Euphrates River, that blue line winding through the big, thick blue line. And if you can read all the little names, I can't read them without my glasses. Something happened to me the last few years, and I can't see anything anymore. I think there's people out there, I see fuzzy faces. I can't even see the clock on the back wall anymore. But anyway, there are a bunch of little names, and these all represent palaces and temples and various buildings in the ancient city of Babylon. The little village of Hela was living right smack dab on the edge of this ancient Babylonian city. And of course, it was becoming increasingly interesting to Western scholars who were starting to move in and excavate parts of Babylon. This is a reproduction of the little village of Hela, and what would happen is the people from the village would cross over the Euphrates River, and they would dig through the ruins of Babylon looking for bricks that they could bring back home and use to build their own houses and buildings. That was wonderful for them because you had this great big repository of bricks for free. You didn't have to go to the brick factory and pay a lot of money to have a guy send you bricks to build your house. You just went across the river and you stole all the bricks you wanted from Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus and whatever else king was there, and they made wonderful building material. Of course, from an archaeological perspective, this is horrifying because we don't know how many ancient buildings were disassembled as they were finding building material for their own structures in the 19th century. In the course of one of these expeditions, they were digging near the ruins. They're actually in the ruins. And in addition to finding the usual bricks that the city was built of Babylon. By the way, you remember that in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, they made these cities out of fired bricks. And on every single brick, it would have stamped the name of the king that authorized the building. And so there's an awful lot, literally hundreds of thousands of bricks in Babylon that have Nebuchadnezzar's name on them. We have 2 of them in the Horn Museum, by the way, if you'd like to see what his name looked like in the cuneiform script. So they would dig these bricks up and bring them home. But occasionally you'd find something else, and in this case, they found a basalt stela, S-T-E-L-E or S-T-E-L-A, and it had cuneiform writing on it. And they didn't know what it said, of course. One European who happened to be visiting the area heard about this. He immediately contacted the director of the new Istanbul Archaeological Museum in Istanbul, in the north part of the country, said, hey, these guys found something. It looks like it's really important. It's got writing on it. You better get it shipped up there. So they cleaned it up, and they shipped it up to the Istanbul Museum, and it was quickly published by a French and a German scholar separately, 2 different articles almost in the same year. And it turned out it was a stele written by the king Nabonidus in the year 556, his first year of reign. And the stele gives as many columns. It's the front of it's flat. Here's another picture here. And the back of it's kind of a spherical, like a column. It looks like half a column, and there's writing on both sides. The top part's broken off. That's always the case in archaeological finds. When you are excited and you're ready to see the name of the Egyptian pharaoh, the document's broken at that point. You'd never know who the person was. That's just the way that they planned it, I think, in antiquity. Whoever buried this thing broke it off so the archaeologists would be frustrated. Anyway, we have most of the information available. And so from that, we can find out the early history of Babylon. And we hear about the chief god Marduk, and we learn a number of things. I won't go through all of those details, but in the middle of this stela is a dream that Nabonidus says he had. And this dream was special because it was a dream inside of a dream. He was having a dream. He saw these planets up in the heavens. They were not in the right configuration, and he was worried that this was a bad omen for him. The dream itself was interrupted by a second dream. The second dream had 2 people appear, and they assured Nabonidus, don't worry, this trouble in the heavens will not affect you. In fact, we want you to know we bless your attempt to become the king. I'll explain why that happened in a minute. And if you will restore the sanctuary of the god Sin, that's the moon god. Sin is not for sinful behavior. It's the name of the moon god in Akkadian. If you'll restore the sanctuary for Sin, you will have a successful reign and you will be successful in all your endeavors. The 2 people, it's interesting. One of them was the dead Nebuchadnezzar. He's not alive anymore. He died 7 years before Nabonidus came along. And yet here he was appearing in a dream, but it wasn't like some kind of corpse from the aftermath. It was just a vision of him, and he's speaking, and he says, everything's going to be okay. And by the way, Marduk blesses your attempt to become the king. Marduk was the enemy god, by the way. And so Nabonidus reassured, and he said, if you restore the sanctuary, everything's going to be okay, and Babylon will keep on living. Okay, it'll keep on existing. So this was the essence of this dream. It was a stunning dream, actually. Now we got to move through and share a little bit more detail about Nabonidus and what was going on. And this comes from the dream stela as well as a few other inscriptions of Nabonidus we have found. We were able to reconstruct this picture of Nabonidus. I'm sorry, this is what AI is able to do for us. Now, I'm not supposed to use that word, but there are positive things you can do. We took a picture of Nabonidus. There's several of them. We put them together, and we asked the AI to generate what this guy looked like. It took his clothes that are depicted, his staff, his crown, all of that comes directly from the pictures of him. And so we're able to make a pretty good reconstruction of what he looked like. He was a senior courtesan of the court of Babylon at that time. It just so happens that in the year 556, there was a young king. He was the third king after Nebuchadnezzar himself. They had three kings in a row, and none of them lasted very long. And this guy was sort of like Rehoboam in the Old Testament. He was not a nice kid. He became the king, and it went to his head, and he started treating everybody horribly. And he made so many enemies in the court, somebody said, it's time for succession. He'd only been king for 3 months. He said, new king. And so he was murdered. Apparently, we're not sure what. One report from Greek scholars later on, Greek historians said he was beat up. They came to his bedchamber. Maybe he was given poison to drink. But anyway, he did not last long. And that left a vacancy for the king of Babylon. The problem was at that time there was no son of the king. This guy was too young, and he hadn't had any kids yet. So there was nobody available to become the king of Babylon. Now, this is a problem because according to their tradition, to become a king, you had to be the son of a king. There was no son of a king, so what are they going to do? They look around. Well, it turned out that Nabonidus was one of the senior advisors to the king, and some people suspected he was involved with the murder of the previous king, but there's no evidence for that. There is more evidence that his son, Nabonidus' son, was a guy named Belshazzar. And he's interesting because for years people said he didn't even exist. But thanks to archaeology, we now have numerous tablets that all say Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus. And moreover, Nabonidus had given him the powers of the kingship. It explicitly says that. And that will become significant later on. It's quite possible, according to some scholars, from cryptic mentions in the inscriptions, that Belshazzar was involved with the assassination of the previous king, and he helped his dad, his father, Nabonidus, become the new king of Babylon. But this wasn't the end of the problems. He was a senior official, but he was not the son of a king. He himself wrote, I'm a nobody. So what's he going to do to justify his kingship? Well, his solution, since I don't have a father who's king, I'm going to claim that God himself appointed me king. I mean, a God is better than a father, right? And so he said, a God appointed me. Well, which God? You know, all the priests of the chief deity were Marduk. And they said, we haven't heard anything about this from our God. You know, what do you think you're pulling here? And so he said, no, it's not Marduk who said I could be king. It is an older god who used to be the chief of the pantheon. He's the moon god. One of his headquarters is at the sanctuary in Haran to the north of Babylon. And as Nabonidus said, I have a vision that says Nebuchadnezzar said I could be the king and that I was approved by sin, and also even Marduk went along with it. So, of course, this was kind of a hard thing for people to accept, particularly the Marduk priesthood. But Nabonidus said, this came to me in a dream at night, a special dream. And everybody was listening. What kind of a dream did you have? And he said, I had a dream within a dream. Now, in the there's a cookbook or a recipe book for dreams, how to interpret Babylonian or Assyrian dreams. I don't know if any of you have read that. It's written in Akkadian. It's been published in English now. But in this book, on tablet number 10, it says there's a special kind of a dream. There's many kinds of dreams. Okay, daydreams, night dreams, dreams in this location, dreams in that location, dreams at this time of the day, dreams at that time of the day, and dreams at this time of the year, and dreams at that time of the year. And there's an interpretive book that tells you how to interpret each of those dreams. In tablet number 10 of the dream book, it says there's a special dream that if it is interrupted by a second dream, in other words, a dream within a dream, that dream will be fulfilled. That dream is true. Okay, and it was indisputable. Okay, so when the Marduk priest asked Nabonidus, on what authority do you claim you have this dream? He said, I was given a dream, and Nebuchadnezzar and another person appeared in it, and I was sanctioned, I was told by them that I would be the king. And this was the second dream after a first dream. It was a dream within a dream. The first dream was Nabonidus looking at the stars and Marduk and sin in the heavens, and he was afraid of a fight or something. The second dream that interrupted that first dream was Nebuchadnezzar and another person coming along telling Nabonidus, it's okay, you can be the king as long as you restore the sanctuary of sin as the new chief god. So that's the background to that particular story. It's rather amazing, actually. And while Near Eastern scholars know the story, biblical scholars have not been aware of it. They have not been aware of it until just recently. We're starting to put the pieces of the story together. I'm going to move through some pictures rather quickly because we don't have much time. I think it's 12:42. Is that correct? With my bad eyes. Okay, so what does Nabonidus have to do? He's got to get up to Haran, which had been destroyed before his time in the year 630. There's a temple there of the moon god Sin, and it's called the Ehul temple. It means the temple of rejoicing. And this was Nabonidus' new chief god, affirmed by his dream within a dream, and that if he would rebuild this, he would be able to give a living place for the god Sin, and Sin would protect him and let him be the king, and all the Marduk priests would have to accept that. So here's the temple. It was originally destroyed in 630, so it was a smoldering ruins, and so when Nabonidus comes along, he's told he has to restore that pile of rubble back into a temple. That's a long process, and it's an expensive process, and the people that had the money for these kinds of projects were the priests of Marduk. Do you think they were happy to pay for this? No way, because it would put them out of business, so to speak. Marduk would be relegated to a secondary god, and Sin would be the primary god, and the thousands of priests in Babylon that served Marduk would be basically out of work. And of course, if you know anything about an ancient priesthood, what do priests get? You know, you go to church to worship, right? And one of the things we just did it here, we pay offerings, right? They expected the same thing back then. And so the Marduk priesthood had a lot of temples, a lot of sanctuaries, and lots of people came to these for worship, and they paid lots of money. And so the priesthood, what do they do with all this money? They invest it. They buy property. They make business investments, and they get richer and richer and richer to the point where they are unstoppable as a political force. They just have too much power, too much influence, and too much money. And this is what Nabonidus is up against. He wants to build a new sanctuary, restore a sanctuary. He doesn't have the funds to do it. So what's he going to do? I'm going to have to skip over this part. It's a fascinating story. Nabonidus had a mother, Adad Gupi, who had a vision and said that you need to restore the temple as well. And this gave him additional impetus for doing it. She was a well-respected person, even by the Marduk priests, because she lived to be 104 years old. And just like most societies, they respected old people who still have their marbles, and she did. She was a very intelligent person. She knew theology. She knew politics. And they respected even the fact she worshiped Sin. They respected that. And so she may have been behind part of the motivation to get the sanctuary in Haran, up where Abraham used to live, by the way, restored. And by the way, this tablet you see here was written by her. It was found in the city of Haran, and this is her vision of what that temple to the god Sin, when it was restored, what it would look like. And this would be the new chief god for all of Babylon, and they would live happily ever after if they would devote themselves to this new god. Well, as you can imagine, oh, by the way, I don't know if I can get back to that last picture. A lot of people ask about the word restore the sanctuary in Daniel 8:14. Then will the sanctuary be restored. That word has a lot of embedded meanings. We debate it in Adventist theology, cleansed, made right, made righteous. There's all sorts, they're all true. The word has a very broad range of meanings, but the core word is sadiq in the Hebrew. In the Babylonian case, it's edeshu. But Edeshu is like a synonym for Sadiq, and both Edeshu and the cognate for Sadiq are found in Akkadian, and in the Hebrew Bible, Sadiq and the cognate for Edeshu are found in the Hebrew Bible too. So these words clearly are interchangeable in a sense. And so when we read that the Babylonian temple of sin was to be restored, it's basically the same thing as when Daniel was told that the temple of the sanctuary would be restored as well. So they're working in the same intellectual cognitive universe. Well, that's just a little side thing. So he needs to restore the sanctuary because of his mother for need of legitimacy, and so he promotes sin, and he starts trying to arrange things to rebuild the sanctuary. There's a little side note I need to say, and I'm going to run out of time. I'm always worried, but this is intriguing to me. We all know about the story of Cyrus, and Isaiah it's predicted by the prophet Isaiah that my servant Cyrus will come and conquer the Babylonians and allow you to go back to Jerusalem and restore your sanctuary. Cyrus was going to be a critical element in the Israelite success or the Judahite success. Cyrus, guess what? Nabonidus before actually had the same vision, but from a Babylonian god. Nabonidus was afraid of going to Haran to rebuild the sanctuary initially because the Medes were up there and he was afraid he'd be attacked while restoring the sanctuary. However, he gets a vision, and it may have been the same one. Marduk says the enemy will be utterly destroyed. Cyrus, his young servant, will liberate Haran and make it possible for Nabonidus to rebuild the sanctuary there. Think about that. That's amazing. Because guess what the Hebrew prophets are saying? In Isaiah 45:1, thus saith the Lord, this time not sin, not Marduk, but Yahweh, he says to Cyrus his anointed, whom I have taken by the right hand to subdue nations before him and to loose the loins of kings, to open the doors before him so that gates will not be shut. Cyrus will ultimately help the Jews or the Israelites conquer the Babylonians. Now this is greatly ironic. The temple and the God that's against Daniel, the god Sin, is going to use Cyrus to help achieve the restoration of the sanctuary. But guess what? The God of the Israelites say, nope, it's going to be Cyrus helping us. And he's going to destroy Nabonidus and the Babylonians, and you're going to go back and restore the sanctuary in Jerusalem. So this is an astonishing historical fact not too many people are aware of. These are clearly contemporary competing things going on, competing sanctuaries, competing gods. Daniel's on one side, Nabonidus is on the other. And this is what the sanctuary would look like. It was restored in the year 543 by Nabonidus, before the whole thing came tumbling down by Cyrus, who invaded Babylon and took away Nabonidus into captivity. Now, meanwhile, the priests of Marduk were furious. They vowed to resist Nabonidus, do everything. They had all the money. They had a lot of the popular support. Nabonidus was losing the popular vote in Babylon, not that there was a real vote. And so he decided he was having so much trouble raising the money, getting the support. Marduk, even though Nabonidus assured me that my dream within a dream, Marduk endorsed me, they said, we're not having any of that. No way. You're making that up. What's a dream within a dream? I know, we don't know what to say about that, but no. So they were giving him a fit over that. They didn't want to lose their control. So what Nabonidus did for a little bit, he started going around saying, look, I'll fix your sanctuary to Marduk. I'll restore the Marduk sanctuary. I'll restore the sanctuary of the other gods. And then we'll do the sanctuary of the moon god Sin. They didn't like that. So even though he did undertake a restoring the sanctuary campaign, notice, restore the sanctuary, restore the sanctuary, restore the sanctuary. What's the key of Adventist message in Daniel 8? Restore the sanctuary. But we're waiting for the heavenly sanctuary. Okay, but so I want you to understand how big this motif was at the time Daniel was alive and before he wrote his prophecy. So what Nabonidus does, these are his visions, and I'll go through these kind of quickly. These show the stars, and he was worried about trouble in heaven. These would represent the gods Marduk and Sin. Here's how they would be depicted in antiquity. And then his dream is interrupted by a second dream, and here is Nebuchadnezzar coming with his courtesan on a chariot, and they speak to Nabonidus in this dream. This is what Nabonidus writes in this stela, and they say, you will be the king if you restore the sanctuary. Marduk approves this. Nebuchadnezzar, I, the dead king, I approve this. If you restore that sanctuary, everything's going to be fine. And so he has given the order to go to Haran and restore the sanctuary. Daniel was witness to all of this. He saw the dream stela. He heard the proclamations from the court. He was a person of the court as a wise man. So he saw exactly what was going on. He also knew that it contradicted the very visions he had been given by the God of the Israelites. So he's wondering, how's this going to all play out? So eventually, because of the difficulty, and by the way, this is a scholar saying this dream within a dream is the only time this ever occurs in ancient history. There's many dreams, hundreds of dreams, thousands of dreams, but there's only one dream within a dream. That's the one by Nabonidus, and that dream's supposed to come true. So this is acknowledged by scholars. They didn't know there was a second dream in the book of Daniel. That's the amazing thing. I think our team's the first one to put this together. There are two competing dreams within dreams, both claiming truth and both claiming to restore the true sanctuary of the true God. But they're competing dreams. That's the amazing thing here. So, and I just kind of affirm that. Moving through some quick pictures. So what Nabonidus did to establish his authority, he had the dream within a dream written down on a basalt stela. Here's his workman. Here he is inspecting it. And then it's mounted in the processional way in front of the Ishtar gates where everybody would see it. Then he required, apparently, some scholars say, all of the priests, all of the wise men, all of the dignitaries of the court had to stand there, and it was read out what this dream said, and they all had to acknowledge that Nabonidus was the true king, and they were to support the building, the restoring of the sanctuary to the god Sin. And so here's a picture of people looking at the stela, and here's another picture of all the dignitaries lining up. This is supposed to be two pictures, but it didn't quite work. Didn't check the technology. And they are hearing the proclamation of Nabonidus around the stela that Sin is the true God and his sanctuary must be restored. And he, Nabonidus, is the true king, approved by the God. This didn't go over well. Now here's Daniel, my depiction of Daniel. He was aware of this. He had to walk by the stela every day when he went through the Ishtar gate. He was a revered wise man, so he was fully aware of what it said. And so he had to wonder, what in the world does this mean for the prophecies that I received back in the time of Nebuchadnezzar? And so he's contemplating this. He will be getting an answer in the near future in his own dream. We'll come to that in a moment. So anyway, the priests of Marduk, they were so much against Nabonidus in spite of this ceremony and the erection of the dream stela, they were still plotting to overthrow him. So to protect himself, Nabonidus decided to leave Babylon where he couldn't be assassinated, and he traveled all the way to Tama in Arabia. We were just there a few weeks ago, actually. We went to the very city of Tama where he was, and we saw Nabonidus' construction works, his walls, the temples he built, the whole thing. He made an incredible city there. And before he left, he made Belshazzar the king in residence in Babylon to put up with the Marduk priests while he escaped off to Tama. One of the advantages of going to Tama, there's a Belshazzar on the throne. I don't have time to go into this, but Belshazzar's existence used to be doubted, but now we have lots of tablets confirming his existence and that he had indeed been made a co-regent of Nabonidus, and Belshazzar was given the responsibility to sit on the throne. In Babylon. Nabonidus, meanwhile, goes down to Tama across the desert. We traveled across this very same road a few weeks ago, except we had the advantage of an air-conditioned car. Even then, it was hot and it was very dusty, and we saw plenty of camels, but we were able to get there in a lot more comfort and a lot quicker than Nabonidus did. We actually have pictures of him scribbled on a wall, a petroglyph, a stone in the middle of the desert that some people say shows Nabonidus riding across the desert. The inscriptions are in Babylonian, so clearly it's either a Babylonian soldier or the Babylonian king himself, and this is debated. So here he is galloping away from Babylon and heading towards Tama to make a new life where he lived for 10 years to raise money to build up his strength. Here is an archaeological reconstruction of Tama. We were visiting the ruins a few weeks ago. It's an oasis city. They have found the walls and some of the ruins of his temples there. They're still excavating there to this day in Saudi Arabia. The purpose for having that is that Nabonidus could collect the tolls from the spice, the caravan spice. People in the Middle East like tolls, Harmuth or in Tama, wherever, they're always getting tolls as people travel through their lands. And so as the camel caravans bringing spice from southern Arabia up to the north to Syria and Mesopotamia, they would stop because there was a famous well. They're called the Hajjal well. We were at this well a few weeks ago. There's still water in it. They have big wheels on top. They attach ropes and camels to them. They pull water up in great big bags. We actually watched this process. I was going to show you a video, but that would take too long of the camels bringing the water up from the well. And then after they got the water and their provisions, they would carry on. They would pay a hefty toll, gold coin, to Nabonidus. And that's how he accumulated in 10 years an incredible amount of wealth to compete with the priests in Babylon. And he built his own temple to Sin in Tema. And he would later build, of course, the sanctuary in Haran, like he had been determined to do. It happened in the year 543-42. We need to come to a closer, I think maybe another 5 minutes, if you can hang in there with me. You got to see the end of the story, right? Or I could just leave it till this afternoon. You come back at 4 and I'll tell you how the story ends, okay? Is it okay? No? Okay, a few more minutes until lunch. So here is Belshazzar here, and here's Daniel contemplating. Now God, after 3.5 years, decides to give Daniel a dream of his own to explain. And guess what style God uses? The same style that Nabonidus had used, a dream within a dream. It was already accepted. This was the super dream, the dream that must be fulfilled, and it has to be true. And at the end of the dream in the Bible, it says, this dream, seal it up because it is true. It actually uses, it is true. Okay, so, but Daniel's contemplating this, and he says, Daniel, in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar, because Nabonidus had taken off for Tema, the king... I'm having trouble with my eyes here. Belshazzar the king, a vision appeared to me. Daniel subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously. I was talking about Daniel chapter 7. The 3rd year of Belshazzar was the year 553. So this is 3.5 years after Nabonidus had his dream. He posted the stela, the dream within a dream, and then he took off for Tema to get out of Babylon. And now Daniel is transported in his vision to Susa in the Persian Empire. He sees the citadel of Persia. He sees their main river there. And while he's contemplating this vision, he's at the Ulai Canal. Suddenly something appears in the heavens for him. And I looked in the vision, and it came about while I was looking that I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam. And I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulai Canal. This is Daniel 8:2. And then suddenly, Ram comes emerging from the west, and then you've got from the east, and the he-goat coming from the west, Greece. And Daniel's witnessing all this, and he's wondering, what does this mean? He gets the hint that these are two kingdoms competing with each other, but he's confused because it's not Babylon and Persia, it's Persia and Greece. In other words, God is pushing Daniel ahead, saying, your vision that I originally gave you is true. What Nabonidus is saying is a bunch of baloney. He didn't use that word baloney. It's not in the Hebrew. But he said, this is not going to happen that way. Nabonidus is wrong. Here's what's really going to happen. And it's what happened before. The horn rose up to heaven. It just brought down stars, the heavenly sanctuary, and so forth. And basically, the two beings then appear. This is the second dream. This is the nail in the coffin's beak. This is what legitimizes Daniel's dream. It's a dream within a dream. Two beings appear, just like it happened to Nabonidus, except this time they're two angels, including the angel Gabriel, and they give an explanation of which sanctuary is to be restored and when it's going to be restored. And it's not what Nabonidus is saying. Nabonidus gave a false dream report. And so this is what gets written down. After 2,300 years, then the sanctuary will be restored. And Daniel realizes, somewhat horrified, this is in Jerusalem, because Jeremiah said that's only 7 years. We're talking about way in the future. So Nabonidus is completely out to lunch. Persia's going to come and go. Greece is going to come and go. And everybody after that's going to come and go. And then the Messiah will return, the true king of the true sanctuary. And then we will have access after 1844. It's not just a judgment. It's the declaration that Jesus Christ died for us. And because of that, what does Paul say in Hebrews and elsewhere? Go boldly. You know, there's a famous picture, and I need to close with this, I guess. There's a picture in our early Adventist literature. It shows Jesus, who's truly our advocate. He's wearing the priestly robes of the Old Testament. There's the great throne of God in the heavenly sanctuary, and there's a humble human being, and he looks like this. Kind of timid, nervous, and you get the impression he's saying, I sure hope Jesus makes a good argument for me, otherwise I'm cooked, you know? And Jesus has his arm around him in an assuring way, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. To me, that's the wrong image, because Paul repeatedly says, go boldly. If you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, and you're sincere and verified by the Holy Spirit, you can go boldly into the sanctuary. You're not a timid guy. Yes, Jesus is arguing, but he's argued you with his death on the cross. If you accept Jesus Christ, you have the right and the privilege to boldly be able to enjoy the presence of God in your life forever. That's the promise. And that's the good news. And I guess I will close by saying if you strip the sanctuary doctrine and all of its theology, it's very clear in Scripture that most people ignore, you're basically leaving us only with a crucifixion that says, yeah, you can live, but it doesn't say anything about your personal relationship with God by being able to enter into his personal presence. No sinner can ever do that. Only a person who's been justified and is righteous by the blood of Jesus Christ. But when we have that status, we can go boldly into the sanctuary. We can have a confident relationship with God. And that is the message we should be sharing. Not a timid message, but a message of strength, boldness, and let people know that God is coming soon, but we have a way out, and it's guaranteed, ironclad, and it's guaranteed by a dream within a dream, the most powerful dream that God could put in Scripture. It's in the middle of the Bible, in the middle of the book of Daniel, in the middle of chapter 8. A lot of people have noticed the chiasms, and that was done on purpose to say this is the most important vision in the Bible. And you can have confidence. If you accept the sacrifice, you can know you'll be in the sanctuary and be able to enjoy the presence of God for all of eternity. That's the message that we're supposed to be sharing at this time. I will have to close now because it's time to close, but this is some of the research we've been working on. It gives an illustration of how God's use of archaeology can help illuminate, provide context, and give us great confidence in the historicity of prophets like Daniel and of the authenticity of the predictive vision messages for us in the end time. May God bless you.